The Vietnam War lasted almost 20 years. It spanned 5 presidential administrations and killed more than 58,000 Americans. It was perhaps America's most divisive and misunderstood war. This is a story about one Versailles, Ohio boy who was forced to grow up quickly, the brutality of war, and a 12-year-old girl who got in the way.
I sat down to talk with Neil Hannan at the handcrafted cabin he built near Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. He's lived in the Copper Basin for 24 years. He lives alone with his 18-year-old cat, Bufus, on what he calls the Hannan homestead. He starts out talking about his early years growing up in Versailles, Ohio.
It was a great existence. I grew up with my mom and my sister. I worked pretty hard, industrious young man, and we didn't have a car. I rode my bike everywhere I went and pulled a sled to do a newspaper route in the winter. And so, but it was a great existence. It's a fine small town with good people, and I go back there periodically just to experience my hometown.
He worked as a stock boy, carryout boy at a local grocery store, a newspaper boy, and other odd jobs. His small town taught him the importance of community service, and he enjoyed helping the town's elderly by carrying their groceries or shoveling their walkways. He was a shy teen, a problem made worse by a stuttering problem. He attended the local Catholic school until the 7th grade, and then later, as high school graduation approached, he had to make a decision on a direction to pursue in life.
The bottom line is I didn't feel comfortable going to college yet. My dad had it paid for and everything, and I didn't have the courage to go to college. I'd lived in that little small town all my life, and so I thought, well, I'll enlist in the Army. And I did it as soon as I turned 18 years old.
So you left the security of your hometown. What was basic training like?
Basic training was Fort Benning, Georgia. A tough fort. The southern forts are pretty tough. And I'm just a young guy. Most folks were at least a year older than I was because they were drafted. And I went in at 135 pounds. I think I came out of basic training 20 pounds heavier and solid. And then they just put us on a bus at the end of that cycle, end of basic training, for Fort Polk, Louisiana, for advanced individual training in infantry. And that was tougher, much tougher than basic training because it was focused. And there were no requirements. You didn't have to shine your boots or shave or anything. It was just training. And that's what we did. And it was good training.
What kind of training did you receive at Fort Polk, Louisiana?
Everything, light weapons, grenades, just ways of doing things better in Vietnam in combat from guys who just came back. Mm-hmm. And so night, how to protect your night vision. You just anything related to combat you can imagine. How to pack your gear, everything, but mostly weapons, grenades, fighting.
Neil's instructors, recent Vietnam infantry returnees, warned him of the dangers ahead. They told him 1 out of 3 infantrymen in his advanced individual training company would die in combat in the next year. Shortly after his advanced training ended, he was shipped to Vietnam on a C-141 transport, landing at Chu Lai on February 5, 1968. Hannan joined his company at LZ, or Landing Zone Colt, south of the demilitarized zone, an area that experienced some of the fiercest fighting in the war. At first glance, Sergeant Haddock immediately nicknamed him Kid. He was barely 19 years old and was forced to grow up quickly. He was now an infantryman in Company A, 3rd of 21st Infantry, 196th Light Infantry Brigade. A couple days after joining his company, he remembers a short patrol near LZ Colt.
We're at LZ Colt, which is a small LZ with sandbags and bunkers and a couple of artillery pieces. That's it. It's not a base, so to speak. And So before we moved out in the field as a company, we did some little small patrols. And I was with a dog handler and his dog and another guy. And we were just walking about, not far from the LZ, but out a kilometer or two. And we came across this hooch, and there was a girl there with her a bandage on her on one ankle. There was no foot left. There was no foot. And I thought, my goodness, it was all infected. It was horrible. And she would have died, I mean. And so I looked at her mom and I nodded, and she nodded back. And I nodded, just thinking, okay, I'm going to take your daughter with me. And I did so. I carried her out, carried her back to LZ Colt, was chastised for bringing in a wounded civilian. But they had to take her then.
Did you think you would get into trouble when you brought a wounded Vietnamese girl to your LZ?
The guys in my squad and platoon had nothing negative to say about it, but the medics were just, they didn't want to take her at all, and because we can't be treating civilians here, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, take her back. I forgot about it. They said, take her back. I said, I don't remember where it was. And so at that point they didn't have much choice. I didn't think of it any different if I'd have come across somebody hurt here in the United States. To me, she needed help, I'll help her. And it was a poor little girl, she was only 12.
Neil quickly forgot about the young girl he rescued as the war intensified.
And what do you remember about your first day in combat?
We had camped that night, dug in, and before we go in, with the tracks and tanks, we had tracks and tanks, a bunch of them. And he said, you take sticks and twigs because you got slits in your helmet liner, you can put camouflage stuff in there. I thought, somebody's looking like is this like from the manual or something? Because trees don't walk across rice paddies. So it was really kind of stupid, and you're in the wide open. They're probably laughing in the wood line out. Yeah, and then it's okay, we're gonna go in first. I said, well, we got these tracks and tanks. Oh no, we go in first to draw fire away from the tracks and tanks. They don't want to lose armor. I thought, boy, I feel special. And then we got left out there. I got left up there, just my squad, and half of them wounded, and everybody else pulled back. And I'm thinking, oh no, we're stuck out here. And nobody even knew we were there till later on. Oh gee, they're still fighting. We have guys up there yet? It was my squad. And then we finally make it back. They sent an APC up to pick up our wounded, so we finally make it back, and we had to go back in 2 more times. The last time riding on the APCs, we were so tired. And my platoon Sergeant Dickerson, good man. He looked over at me, his gold tooth there. He looked like an old guy to me. He was probably 25. He's 26. He said, well, kid, how does it feel to have a CIB, Combat Infantry Badge, for getting under fire? And it's a badge. And I said, no different, Sarge. I was numb already. So I just figured you may as well break in quick.
His company saw constant action until he was pulled from the battlefield in October 1968. Humping a heavy pack, his days were filled with patrols through jungles, rice paddies, and villages. He endured monsoons, excruciating heat, leeches, and the ever-present enemy. His gear often weighed more than 100 pounds. Before night, his company would establish a perimeter, dig foxholes, lay out claymore mines, and send out night listening posts and ambush patrols.
Then in the morning, you pull the plug on the detonator so you don't accidentally blow somebody up, which happened. And you unpack everything up, you pack your gear up, you move out. And you single file, typically where we were, you just walk single file. And you hump all day, or till maybe middle of the day, and then you may set up for resupply ammunition, food, sea rations, cold sea rations, and just kind of regroup. It's the heat of the day, And sometimes you're just taking that breather. And then you'll move out again in the afternoon and eventually make it to your next night position, where you're going to dig in and do all that again. And you'll make contacts. You'll get ambushed. You'll get mortared at night. You'll get attacked at night. There is not one minute you have that you feel at ease, actually. It just doesn't exist. And you'll do this for months at a time. And there's no place to get cleaned up. And you don't even care. You don't care.
How did you deal with the stress you experienced each day?
You just don't have highs or lows. It's just you exist. That's all it is. And when you get hit hard and you're laying there in the rain and the monsoons, and leeches are sucking on you, you're carrying 90 to 105 pounds around with you. It's just you're just, and then you think I've been so tired that I've dropped my weapon. I couldn't even hold my weapon anymore. I'm trying to put one foot in front of the other, and you pick it up. There have been other times when you think, boy, I hope nothing happens, because I'm just so beat. The bullets start flying, the adrenaline kicks in, and you have this reserve energy somewhere. There is really no escape from it. You don't think about going home because you don't really believe you ever will. And that's kind of a taboo to talk about that, or to say how few days you have left or months or something. It's best just to forget about that. And you don't make necessarily really good friends in the field. They're just comrades, fighting comrades. So it's not like you're necessarily really, really tight with anybody, because they come and go, and you have to, your body mentally handles that somehow, so otherwise you'd never make it. I think back of what I endured, and I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I handled it. Although over there at the time, I said, this is going to change me. To myself, I'd say there's no way you can come out of this normal. I knew that.
2 months into his tour, Neil fought in his toughest battle at Nui Ha, which was just south of the demilitarized zone.
They sent, Nui Ha is just right on the DMZ, demilitarized zone, and not far from Dong Ha Marine Combat Base. The North Vietnamese sent an entire division, fresh division, south with the goal of capturing Dong Ha. They had never sent a force, they never assembled a force of that size during the entire war in Vietnam as that one. They were everywhere. And we ran, and they airlifted us up to basically, the Marines were getting annihilated. They sent us in, we were the only Army unit sent in, our battalion, and we got right in the middle of where they wanted to be, and we just fought it out for 14 days. It was brutal battle, but that was what Nui Ha was all about. It was front page news in the U.S., and it's well documented in a book called Magnificent Bastards by Keith Nolan. The whole time up there, in my company, Alpha Company and Charlie Company of our battalion were hit particularly hard. I think Charlie might have lost 13 the first day. Then following that, we lost our medic, and it was a contest objector. He didn't carry a weapon, but he still went out and did it. So he was very well respected. And then we were fighting, and we had to, we were low on ammunition, and we had two of us crawl back to the helicopters landed back behind us to drive, and we were carrying a case of grenades, and I got some shrapnel through the thigh. I'm not sure if it was bullet or shrapnel, but it cut me right through the thigh. But there was a lot of lead flying around, so that's the worst. And then when we took Nui Ha and dug in, the next day we moved northwest, a short distance, walked right into them again. We had been fighting online, just walked towards them online until they started shooting, So it was some brutal battle. May 6th of '68 is when we moved northwest a short distance from Nui Ha and walked right in the middle of Colonel Taj's 300 men. And that was just a meat grinder. There was no cover. my squad had the cover of Jones Creek. That's what saved us. And that was another mistake. My squad switched positions with Bill Baird's squad. He moved out in the wrong position. I assumed his position. That whole squad was annihilated. Baird was captured.
As the squad pulled back from the front line, Neil came close to being shot or captured by the North Vietnamese soldiers.
As we were pulling back from, and it was very difficult to pull back from an engagement like that because you're locked in with them. And they were very bold. They were just moving right at us. And a mortar round came in and knocked me kind of just goofy. I didn't get injured, but the concussion. And I was laying there on the ground, and it probably was just seconds, but it seemed like longer. And when I came around, Larry Haddock, squad leader, was on one knee just sitting there firing at the NVA who were walking towards us, also firing. And he looked down at me, he said, "You okay, kid?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let's get out of here." So we made it out. But if he wouldn't have stayed with me, it would have been all over. I'd either been in prison or killed, probably killed, because I would have been shooting. So I wasn't going to get captured.
Twice he was the last surviving member of his squad. His canteens, pack, and jungle fatigues were hit by bullets and shrapnel numerous times. A week after the Battle of Nui Ha, half of his squad was killed or wounded during a night attack. The following night, during another attack, a shell exploded directly above his position, seriously wounding all the remaining soldiers in his squad except him. In 2 or 3 of his letters home, Neil had to write around the bullet holes of his writing pad. He was hit in the helmet by a launched grenade, but it was a bad round and knocked him to the ground. Despite wounds to his right finger and thumb, and suffering a bullet wound in his thigh, Hannan defied the odds. Several of his comrades started to call him the lucky guy.
Just things would happen to me like the only man left in my squad, everybody else, and artillery round coming right over our position and get everybody but me. But yet the shrapnel was flying, pounding down all around me. My pack's all chewed up, and I'm unscathed. Launched grenade that hit me glanced off my helmet. It was one of our M79s, but it was used by the North Vietnamese who had captured it a couple days before, maybe a day before, and when they killed 13 of our men in a night attack.
After returning from Vietnam, Neil taught light infantry weapons at Fort Dix, New Jersey. He then transferred to Indiantown Gap Military Reservation in Pennsylvania as a stockade guard commander. He was discharged from the Army on August 17, 1970. He returned home to Versailles, flat broke, but he got a job as a manager at the same grocery store he worked at as a carryout boy years earlier. He enrolled part-time at Wright State University, 60 miles from home, and graduated with honors with an accounting degree. He also bought a house that he renovated and later purchased a 1971 Ford Mustang. He decided the best antidote to the horrific war memories was to stay busy.
Certainly the war affected me, and it does, and it always has, and it's made many things more difficult because you have to overcome that to survive, and you find there are no easy ways of doing it.
Neil grew restless. He purchased 90 acres in Michigan and moved 3 cabins from Ohio to his property. He spent 20 years in Michigan and became restless again. In 1997, while traveling through Western Canada and Alaska, he noticed 35 acres for sale in the Copper Basin, and on a whim he purchased the land, borrowed a chainsaw to clear the spruce trees, and returned in 1998 to finish his cabin and live in the Copper Basin. In 2010, Neil had the opportunity to return to Vietnam as part of a tour with a company called Global Spectrum. Whether he should return to Vietnam was not an easy decision to make.
Here again, you're always in survival mode, and there are no easy answers, and And I just thought, well, what do I have to lose by going back? Really, it can't get worse. I couldn't see where it was going to get any worse. I was apprehensive, certainly, but that was my reason for going back, was just because I didn't have anything to lose. I thought I'd give that a try and see what washed out of it. I didn't know how well I'd handle going back to areas where I fought and lost a lot of guys. Because that's all sobering. When you're right there and you never thought you'd be back in this spot ever, it was, that was a real concern. And it's a risk, because if it affects you negatively, in a bad way, I mean really negatively, then maybe you made a mistake. But that's a risk I was willing to take.
He arrived in Vietnam and met his guide Thong, and then visited his old combat zone.
I wanted to go to the LZ Colt area, and my guide at the time, Thong, said, okay, so we were at LZ Colt, and while there, the former, what was LZ Colt, it's just some holes in the ground now. And here again, this is where I choppered out to my outfit and brand new. So it's kind of, it's just almost, it's hard to get a handle on it sometimes, is how, because this is where you were just how many years ago, just as a kid.
And then, almost out of the blue, Neil had a request that surprised his guide.
So I told Thong, I said, there was a girl that I saved. I pulled out of the field when in late February, early March of '68, and I wonder if she still lives here. I wonder if she's lived. I wonder if she. And he goes, why didn't you say something earlier? I could have done some investigation. I said, well, so he was talking to just people passing by, and they were pointing here and there, and we finally met with the village officials. Had tea, and then they mentioned 3 girls that could be. And the first one didn't work out, but the second one was Song. We came across the hooch, and of course we surprised them because they didn't expect a group of tourists, so to speak. And Thong asked them many questions, so as not to lead them at all, just open questions, and it was certainly her. And so it was a big deal. Everybody's like, oh my goodness.
Can you describe Sohn's living conditions?
She had, just from malnutrition and different problems through her life, she had issues, brain, just starving for nutrition and that. So she had problems. I think she may have even had a stroke. But she had multiple medical problems related to mostly what the medical people said was malnutrition.
Okay, at this point you decide to take action. What did you do?
Well, to me it was the same as when I found her. You help her. So I figured at that point I felt I have an obligation to help her.
At first, Neil used his own money to help Sohn, but gradually as word spread, he started receiving contributions from friends, former Vietnam veterans, and people he did not even know. Neil arranged for Sohn to be transported to Da Nang for 3 months of rehabilitation therapy and medical evaluation. He hired local contractors to install a shower, toilet, and build a chicken coop for Sohn. They also replaced electrical wiring in her home and dug a well. Neil purchased a wheelchair for Sohn.
The next year when I went back, you could see a huge difference in her appearance and everything. She just looked like, she was bright and smiling and everything. So whatever we did worked.
In 2012, Sohn died, leaving her mother.
But I thought, well, you know what? Okay, she's dying. And when she died, I thought, though, she died. She lived, she got to live before she died. And she knew people cared about her and that. She knew that. And so it was a great way for her to end. The preceding year, 2 years, was just the best, probably the best of her life.
Neil made 5 more trips to Vietnam and is planning another visit for the summer of 2023. His outreach has extended well beyond helping one person in need. He helped 2 former Vietnamese scouts in his former brigade, and then started expanding his reach.
And really accelerating in 2016 with disabled people in rural villages, trying to give them the means to support themselves. And so we started giving away female piglets, 10-kilo piglets to each family. And the Red Cross helps pick out these families for me. They know who's most in need. And ducks and pigs, 50 ducks, 50 pigs, or not 50 pigs, 50 chickens. 50 pigs would be a lot. And the pigs, of course, they have litters, 3 litters a year or what have you, and they got a happy pig that runs around and makes sure that all of that happens. And so it just, for 1 pig or 50 chickens, just can turn a family completely around. Kids can go back to school, they have what they need, they have food, they have income. And so that's amazing. That's a power that the trauma of war has allowed me the power to do these things that a lot of people don't have. They don't have the interest, they don't have it's not personalized, so it's personalized for me to be able to go over there and do these things in the areas where I fought.
During one of his humanitarian trips, Neil remembers a villager who identified a reason why he might have escaped death during his tour in Vietnam.
And one guy told me, he says, you survived the war to help people in Vietnam. I don't know, but that's what's happening.
So it's obvious you get excited about Vietnam. How has this experience changed you?
Oh yeah, it's selfish in a way because I am helping myself. It's the best therapy there is. And the schools. When I go to these schools, I went to 4 or 5 schools this year, handing out school supplies for the poorest kids in those schools for the entire year. And I personally hand it to each one, and they're respectful, they're polite, it's just refreshing. And at Nui Ha, I gave away 2,770 writing tablets.
During his 2018 trip to Vietnam, Neil's daughter Katie and granddaughter Kira accompanied him.
Oh, that was the trip right there. When you can have 3 generations. We climbed this old fire support base where I got in a big jam one time up there. Kira would see something the little boy maybe could use, and Katie would see something else, and I'd see something else, and they helped me a lot, picking out things. And we took them new cookware and a little ball and some stuff for the kid, and they just need something to go on. They're poor over there. They can't help each other because they don't have money for themselves. So when they get a shot in the arm, and they never beg, they never ask you for money. It's just a little bit. Just you can see what good it does. You can't stop doing those things if you have the power. And I can go anywhere in Vietnam, unlike most people. I can go anywhere in that country.
When you were in Vietnam, you also met Colonel Ta, who you fought against at the Battle of Nui Ha. What was it like meeting this old adversary?
This is just almost hard to fathom that when I'm barely 19, I'm out there fighting, and here's the commander of the guy, of the men that we fought against. It's just hard to believe. So, and that I did, he brought out a razor, and that was our Lieutenant Kimball's razor. And I got that back to his family the following year. He wanted the family to come over and get it, and I said, they're not going to do that. He would never sit there and lamented his men that were killed. And they had to hastily bury their men. There's no time to, and he went around and found all the men wherever he fought in Vietnam, including Nui Ha, and he put something in each grave so he'd know who it was, and went around after the war and buried them in actual cemeteries. So they're at Nui Ha Cemetery, the men that died there.
Neil plans to continue his Vietnam outreach, keeping it simple and responsive to the needs of the Vietnamese people he encounters during his trips.
I like it small and intimate. I'm in charge. I don't have a board of directors, and I can just make those decisions. I realize I could I could go online and create all these things for PayPal and what have you. I don't really want to do that. I'm not comfortable asking people for money, really. And although people they thank me for allowing them to be a part of it, and because they see through my blog and my pictures, they see exactly what their money does. And they know not a penny goes towards any of my expenses. You talk hotels, travel, maybe an occasional beer, whatever my 50-cent meals, that's me, that's on me. You know, all this is direct aid to the people.
What kind of advice do you have for Vietnam veterans who are struggling to cope with post-combat life?
I just think that you don't want to cheat yourself by just wallowing in a mud hole of misery, when maybe there is an option out there that will lift your spirits and put a more positive light. So when I thought of Vietnam prior to this humanitarian effort, it was all ugly. That's all you thought about. It was ugly, and the blood, and just everything. And you just shake your head at, how did I ever survive this crap? And now I'm still surviving, you know. And you can continue in that vein. It's not going to get any better. That's the thing. You can take medication. There's things you can do to try, but that's just not the long-term answer to anything. So you try something different. You think out of the box. You don't follow a particular path somebody tells you. You pick your own. And like I did, I went back over and I found, you know what? I can go to these areas that were traumatic, and now those bad memories are countered by the good memories, and so you balance the scales somewhat, and that makes a big difference in your life.